everybody. So, I hope I don't annoy you by today's topic. I know that a couple podcasts ago I went back and did a little history with the 2016 general election. Well, anyway, what I wanted to talk about today is everyone seems to think that whoever's elected president is the absolute end of, well, not everyone, half of society, or at least half of media portrayal, is that if it's a Democrat or Republican, half the media is that that's the end of the American society as we know it. And don't get me wrong, I think that there are presidents, both Democrat and Republican, that have acted in some self-serving interests. But I don't think that they've presided over the end of America as we know it. So, to that end, today I wanted to talk about my perceptions and the things I lived through as an adult under the 3 presidential administrations that I've lived under as an adult. And now I remember some stuff further back into the Clinton years, but it was before I started paying massive amounts of attention. The only thing I remember about Clinton really was Monica Lewinsky. Everything else I learned about the Clinton years was after the fact, historical research, things like that. So I'm going to be keeping it with stuff that I was aware of at the time. So I turned 18 in 2006. I remember going to register to vote. I remember going to register with Selective Service because that's still a thing when you turn 18 and you're a male. Even though the draft hasn't been around for decades. But I remember going to do that. At the time, I was renting my room at my parents' house. So I didn't have a huge amount of expenses. The trucks that I owned at this point were paid for in cash. I had one truck, got in a wreck, insurance, bought another one. Well, towards the very end of the Bush Jr. administration, I do remember fuel prices going through the stinking roof, and I've always had some kind of a side job forever, and I was cutting grass with a lawnmower at the time, and I had a big truck to pull the mower with and a big mower to cut grass quickly. Well, my fuel bill during the time I owned that truck nearly doubled per week. Bear in mind, I was never leaving my county And I don't think I went any more than 10 to 15 miles away from my house during those years. But I was working a regular for the man job, and I was cutting grass. Well, that truck was diesel. My lawnmower was diesel. And there were times that my fuel bill would exceed $130 a week, running back and forth, cutting yards, running back and forth to and from work, and doing 18, 19-year-old kid stuff that you just do when you're 18, 19 years old. Driving around, hanging out Walmart parking lot, whatever. I was young and dumb. Okay. I remember gas prices had got so high at that point in time. I ended up having to get rid of that truck. And I bought another vehicle that was a big gas guzzler because I needed something to tow a trailer with. Well, I bought a gas vehicle. And gas prices had been so high for so long that nobody wanted to feed a big gas guzzling SUV that I bought. So I ended up paying approximately half what it was actually worth because the people that traded it in probably traded it on something that was far more fuel efficient. The dealership probably didn't want to own a big 3-row SUV because they couldn't sell it easily, so they probably gave them no money for it by comparison to what it was worth. So they could list it for literally half off of Kelley Blue Book and make money. So I bought a half off 9-year-old SUV at the time. Well, shortly after that, I remember my fuel bill went down quite a bit per week. I was only paying $84 a week in gas. It's great. But let me think. I remember my fuel bill went down. I was working some relatively dead-end job. The only way to do decent in this company was to become a manager, and you were salary, and they owned your butt, and they knew it, and they'd make you work crazy hours, so it wasn't really a long-term aim for me. But fast forward, because there was a couple years, like right after Obama got elected, I do remember that fuel prices did go down some because I have a gas guzzler. I'm going to be one of the first people to notice. And there was I ended up getting a job with very good health coverage, which worked out good because I did end up having a couple problems in my early 20s that I needed to see a doctor, or it wasn't anything big. I was just having issues with my hands, and that got squared away. Under Obama, there wasn't really much change in my perception about the way things were going. I do remember this is jumping ahead several years. I do remember it becoming harder to get a job. Like, as far as from the time that you put in an application till you can get employed. Like, I remember even, like, there was one time I ended up in a pretty tough spot several years back. And I'm looking at a legit startup, bottom feeder, tough job. Which this person would go more than 30. And I could not get employed for at least a week there because they would have had to have run a background check and drug test and credit check and I'm like, I'm working at the car wash, for Pete's sakes, just give me a job. But anyway, I do remember that becoming more difficult, but I imagine that was more on the companies than presidential administrations. I moved jobs a couple times during the Obama administration. And the only big thing I remember that came down from presidential level that affected me directly was the Affordable Care Act. I got to keep a few less dollars out of my paycheck every week. Wasn't really a big deal. At the time, I was just dating someone. I wasn't engaged or married, I don't believe. But due to the fact it was just me with no kids, the Obamacare premiums didn't affect me in a big way. But I do remember there being a difference in my paycheck because of it. And I got paid bi-weekly, so maybe like $40, $50. So not a huge dollar amount, but it was it was noticeable. It was noticeable. I also remember I worked a job for about 4 weeks before I got hired onto my present position, where I looked into their health care and they gave it to us during an orientation class, and at this point in time, I had my wife and kids and one on the way, so it was, healthcare was something I needed to be concerned about. Well, anyway, the premiums working for this company got up to, they had it broke down like on a bi-week basis, how much out of your check it costs for your insurance. And the premiums for this got just ridiculous. Adding a wife and kids up, and it got to the point where it was like $150 a week for insurance. And I've done a little research into health insurance and what likely caused issues like that. I know that with Obamacare causing massive chaos in the health insurance sector, that costs all around got inflated. I'm not going to cite sources on that. I've done research. I know that they rolled back pre-existing condition regulation, or that they enforced pre-existing condition regulations where insurance companies could not cover you for a pre-existing condition, and they could not bill you for having a pre-existing condition. which there's arguments I've heard on both sides of that, some of which make sense. But my take on it is, okay, if you have two 30-year-old dudes that have been driving since they were 16, one of them's got a handful of speeding tickets, a bunch of points off of his license, and 2 car accidents in the past 5 years, and the other one's got a clean driving record with maybe just some mild speeding, you know which one's going to get the break on their car insurance, provided they're insuring the exact same car. I know that health insurance gets people upset, so I'm not going to say that, well, there's the model for health insurance, but you don't get to call something insurance if the companies that pay out the money on claims don't get to use an insurance model. Anyway, that's another discussion entirely. But I just remember thinking how expensive the health insurance was, and that even though I had found a relatively decent paying job for the time and was pulling down more overtime than I personally could tolerate, it would be a stretch to afford it at the time, much less if the overtime went away. Well, anyway, the next thing that I remember affecting my life from a presidential level, actually, I take that back. Okay, so there was the Affordable Care Act, and then I do remember the Obama government shutdown. While none of that affected me directly, I do remember hearing that there was a ton of staging already done because this particular government shutdown had been seen on the horizon, and a lot of the national monuments in D.C. were barricaded off. Vietnam Wall, Washington Monument, Jefferson Memorial, things like that. I wasn't there for that. I have been to D.C. twice, both times when I was under 18, so I didn't see any of this firsthand, just repeating what I heard. If it's true, it's true. If it's not, oh well. And I apologize. But I remember thinking that that was kind of a crock of it, that the federal government couldn't pass its own spending resolution, and people that had planned vacations couldn't go see the national monuments in Washington, D.C. I also remember hearing a story, and again, don't know if this is true or not, there are people that bought property and built houses years ago, and they were close to federal or national park and wildlife preserve areas. They were off the actual preservation, but they were still on the federal ground. They were actually being escorted out of their houses because the national park was closed. Again, don't know if it's true or not, but I did hear it on a rather renowned radio show, and the guy is not afraid of speaking a retraction. And to my knowledge, he never did. So I tend to believe that. Fast forward to, I think the next big thing that affected me would have been Donald Trump when they passed the tax cuts. I know that there was a lot of talk in the news, it will or won't help the little guy. Sorry about that. Got a text message. My car is trying trying to read it to me, and it's notifying me of it. Anyway, I do know that there was media coverage either way about, well, these are going to be great for the little guy, oh, these are just tax cuts for the wealthy and 1%ers. So I know that there was coverage both ways on that. I ended up getting at least $30 to $40 more a check on a weekly paycheck out of that. I do remember comparing my pay stubs closely before and after that got put into effect. And noticing that my weekly take-home pay had gone up. So, myth busted, maybe? I guess, I don't know. But, I guess the reason I went through all that history from basically 06 to 2020 is the presidency, who was in office, didn't really affect me that much or even in an unmanageable way. There were things I have liked and disliked about basically every president that I've been an adult under. I didn't like when crude oil was selling for $150 a barrel because I had gas guzzlers by necessity and it was costing me an arm and a leg to feed them. I didn't like the Affordable Care Act mandate. I heard a lot of stories where that hurt a lot of people. The if you like your doctor, you keep your doctor, like your plan, keep your plan was a patent lie. Because sure you could have, but then the other language in the ACA mandated changing to all the plans and whether or not doctors would take them. So, and I know some people, it's funny, I actually know a guy that personally, that he ended up benefiting from the ACA. So while he personally didn't like the bits and pieces of the legislation, specifically the individual mandate and getting rid of pre-existing condition clauses, which caused insurance costs to go up, it personally benefited him. And he told me that, and it was interesting to hear from him because he wasn't a fan of the ACA. And then with Trump, for Pete's sakes, keep him off Twitter, but give him a press conference. Also, a friend of mine and I were talking one time, and it's funny, like, personally, I like Trump more as a president than I do some other presidents that I've been an adult under. But out of those, I probably would not be as likely to invite, like, okay, if I had all those presidents' phone numbers, their personal cell phones, and I was going to have a big cookout, Trump is probably near the bottom of the list on who I would invite just due to his attitude about everything. Oh, we're going to have the best cookout ever. It's going to be unbelievable. I think that George Bush would be a more down-to-earth, interesting guy to hang out with. Could be wrong. That's just my opinion. But anyway, yeah, that's basically the podcast, that whoever was president didn't have a huge effect on my life personally. One guy took $20 to $30 a week out of my paycheck. The other guy gave me $20 to $30 extra a week in my paycheck. You can blame Bush for the cost of crude oil during all that kerfuffle in the Middle East, but they started it. So, yeah, just the president isn't the be-all, end-all, neither is Congress or the Senate. There's so many more gears in the machine than that. And I think to make it that simple, you're doing a disservice to a lot of American society. But anyway, that's the gist of what I wanted to talk about today. Just, while I do think the presidency matters, I don't think that it matters to the degree that people, to the degree of importance that people place on it. So, anyway, I guess that's the podcast for today. I think this is my longest one so far. Yeah. So anyway, hope everyone has a good day. Stay safe. Stay informed. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. Notifications if you want to know when our videos go up. Back on a 4-day work week this week. I do not know what I'll be doing over the weekend, so if I end up going anywhere by myself, could end up putting out a 5th one yet. Take care and have a good day.